Hello and welcome to Media Talk, a class discussion today about things radio. And our guest today is Jamie Futrell. Professor Valentine, can you tell us about Jamie and his career?
Well, we don't have time to cover very much. I can tell you this, that Jamie started out as a student at Murray State University, so far as I know. I assume he graduated from the county high school, the same county with Murray State University, because he got to university, he was an outstanding student, and he got into a number of activities at the university, one of which was an apprentice in the National Storytelling Project of the National Boy Scout Museum when it was located at the university. After his college career was finished, Jamie got immediately into the media. He started life with Bristol Broadcasting as a sales representative. He charged up to the ranks and became the sales director for Bristol and the Paducah market, and he now serves as the general manager for Bristol in the Paducah market, and he has made quite a mark on the media. We're going to find out today something about radio as a medium. We're going to find out about radio sales. How do you sell advertising for radio? And we're going to get a look at the future of radio through the eyes of Jamie Futrell. Jamie, let me start you off this way, my friend.
Okay.
I should tell people that he continues to perform as a storyteller. If you give him a microphone in a room full of people, the laughter is going to start any minute, and it won't stop till long after he leaves the building. Today is a little more serious than that, however, because we're trying to get a grasp on this medium, radio. It is an old electric medium. It is probably the oldest of the electronic medium, but for a lot of people, it's too old to make sense. For some people, it is brand new, and this is one of those people. So Jamie, let me ask you this. When I was in high school, the most important thing we could do when class was over would be to get to a car or to pull out a transistor radio, find out what the score was in the World Series, if you weren't listening to it on your transistor radio all the way through study hall or Mrs. Wheat's English class, and find out what new hit was out from Paul Revere and the Raiders or the Beatles or the Dave Clark Five. Music was very important, and it was always available in your automobile, which was a fairly new innovation in those days. But when I talk to young people today, they prefer to consume music through an iPod, an iPad, or the iPhone, their own phone. And one wonders, are young people still listening to the radio? Who is listening to the radio? What can you tell us about the radio listening market? Who's in it, and how do they consume radio today?
Absolutely, and Dr. Kevin and Dr. Bob, thank you both for inviting me. This is an honor and a privilege, and I always enjoy having the opportunity to share with my Murray State students, with the Murray State students, and with the institution. Absolutely, radio has changed, and we won't go back to how long ago that was that you were in English class, Dr. Bob, but we know that T-Rex was still standing in the parking lot, probably. But, you know, the reality is radio has changed, and I think all of the legacy media does not have the same type of impact that it had whenever it first was brought out. You know, television doesn't have the same impact it had. Newspaper doesn't have the same impact it had. Radio doesn't have the same impact it had. But not having the same impact that it had and not having an impact at all are two completely different things. And the reality is that radio is still very impactful, is a reality. One of the things that I love, the new statistic that has not just this past year, but has been out now for about 5 years since Nielsen bought Arbitron Ratings Company. Nielsen rates both television stations and radio stations. And for years and decades, we were always told television had the largest reach of any medium. And that has changed in the last 5 years since Nielsen now owns both ratings for radio and for television. Now, all of a sudden, there's a new king of the hill with reach, and that king is radio. Television reaching 88% of all Americans, radio reaching 92% of all Americans. One of the things that you talked about with well, what about younger people are getting listening to consuming music on their iPhones, on their listening devices, their digital devices, whatever type that may be, their Android phones, whatever, that they're doing that. And there's no doubt that that's unquestionable that that's happening. But what's happening now is that radio, instead of having this behemoth share of the audio listening, it is having to share the audio listening with other platforms, but it's not given up audio listening. In other words, because people are listening to other things, it's not, well, that they now listen to their smartphone and they don't listen to radio. No, they now listen to their smartphone and radio.
But there's only 24 hours in a day, and so
that's exactly right.
So that's kind of getting parsed down a little bit. So I'm curious if you could maybe comment on my perceptions, which may actually be misperceptions. First, I'm thinking that most of the radio audience is probably in their car, that the days of having the home FM receiver and the antenna on the roof are probably gone. And so it's when people are in their car, that's probably where your biggest audience is. Is my perception, you think, accurate?
Well, yes, there are parts that are accurate, but Kevin, COVID, this whole situation that we're in right now has introduced a new dynamic. So, in reference to Bob's earlier question, while young people are getting new music from YouTube, from Spotify, from those other sources, still the number one source for new music is still radio. Number one for discovering new music is still radio. Okay, so there's no doubt, you're right, Kevin. We don't have the share that we once had. When I first came into radio, and that's been nearly 3 decades ago now, we had a little over 5 hours, like 5 hours and 28 minutes a day of radio consumption. A little bit later, that was down to 4 hours. Now we're sitting at 3 hours and 40-something minutes of radio consumption. So there's no doubt that it's cutting into time with radio, but there's a big difference in cutting into our time and eliminating us. And so I think that's one of the things that whoever the underdog is, the new person on the block is getting all the attention. And that's exactly what's happening, because we're the old thing, and who cares about old things, right, Bob? And so the reality is that we're the old thing, not the fresh new thing. And so we're not getting the attention, but we are still carrying a lot of influence. And one of the factors that people aren't considering, I'll come back to my COVID remark, is that while they may not be doing, and this is happening for students that are in your class, some of them might be thinking right now, well, I don't listen to the radio. I don't listen to the radio. As soon as I get in my car, I immediately connect with my playlist, and that's what I play. Okay, what about when you ride around with somebody else in their car? Are you always in control of the audio there? What about when you walk into a business? Businesses,
Yeah.
most businesses now are playing radio. And what you don't realize is that that's in the background and you're getting exposed to that audio. And that audio counts. That
Yeah.
counts as listenership for radio, and that counts as impact for radio. So those things are important. Car listening was our biggest consumption, but here was something that I was really thinking that the whole COVID situation was going to wipe us out. Oh man, this is bad for us. We're telling everybody don't drive back and forth to work, and instead just stay home all day. And several have done tests. Nielsen's done tests. A couple other platforms, organizations have done tests, and all of them have agreed with the same thing, and that is radio consumption during the pandemic has increased, depending on which survey you're looking at, anywhere between 25 and 37%.
That was the other perception. That's another one I was going to ask you to comment on. Is I have this perception, right or wrong, that a lot of times listenership is when there is an emergency going on. So a few years ago, when we had the ice storm in West Kentucky, to find out what roads were open, where you could get fuel, where you could get clean water, all of these things, radio was the way that you did it. There was no electricity. You couldn't get on the internet. You couldn't look at your television. And to listen to the radio, I had to go out in the garage and get in my car where there was a radio. And so whether it's the ice storm, or if it's COVID, or if that Snarknado ever shows up, it's over-the-air broadcast that we go to, because it's still going to be there if you have something that will run on a battery.
Yeah, that you're exactly right. And for those that lived through the ice storm, they know that was one of the things. I mean, just going back to that, we were seen as part of critical infrastructure, and we were the first radio station. One of our radio stations was the very first one to come back on the air after the power went out. The reason for that is we have generators here at our studio and at our transmission site. So we had those generators going. And in fact, at one point, our generator here is rather old. And so our general manager, I wasn't the general manager at the time, but our general manager was very concerned on whether or not it was going to make it. And the county judge executive ordered the National Guard to deliver another generator to us so that we would be able to stay on the air. And so we were critical in those early days of getting information to people, letting people know. In fact, the National Guard was listening to the radio to know who was stranded and without power and how to get to them, because of, there being so many forms of communication being down. But here's a survey from Nielsen. I'll read to you. They were asked, why do you connect to radio? And 53% of the people says, makes me feel informed about the things I need to know. 46% said it helps me know about what stores are open and where I can shop. And 46% said, makes me feel more connected to my community. Those were the three top reasons. And that's what radio is doing that Spotify can't do. Spotify might be able to deliver the music that you want, but Spotify can't talk about the local stores. It can't talk about the actions that the mayor took. It can't talk about the local weather. And so that's what we've recognized from day one. Guys, this is our cornerstone, local, 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 local. And we've got to make sure that that's what we continue talking about. We continue delivering better than anybody else. And that's what we've done. I think the competition has been good for radio, to having other audio sources to compete with, because it's forced us to make sure that we're delivering what we do best, and what we do best is local.
Jamie, let me raise this issue with you. You've just identified radio as an important, very important source of local information for the citizen. And I think the Bristol operation in the Paducah market is a really good example of how radio has changed to keep up with the times and the technology. Actually, Bristol publishes a newspaper.
An electronic one, you're exactly right.
Handling some radio stations, is that correct?
That's exactly right. We have.
I was going to say, why did you decide to move in that direction at this particular time in the development of the medium?
Well, in 2009, we launched WestKentuckyStar.com, and we already had one of the most awarded newsrooms in the state of Kentucky. And so we knew that news was going to be critical to our existence in the future. And so we knew that in the future, if people were going to tune in, if all we had to offer was music, then we were going to lose. Because Spotify could do that better than we could. In reality, if what you're wanting is all the songs you like, but what we would be able to offer, I mean, I think that we do offer something different in music. We offer that element of surprise. So there is a different flavor that we can offer in music, but we knew that the big advantage that we had to have was combining that music with the local content. That was our big advantage. And so by taking West Kentucky Star, what we were able to do is further monetize the news for us so that we could pour in more resources into our news department, make sure that we had even higher quality content in news and local information, so that it would improve our radio product. And that's exactly what we did. And it's paid off wonderfully for us. So West Kentucky Star does over 2 million page views per month, over 200,000 viewers per month are coming to West Kentucky Star to read it. And so that helps us to be able to have more news content, because we're seen as a news outlet and not just a radio outlet. And that helps us with our radio news, which helps us provide a better radio product. So that's very critical to our process.
So it would be fair to say that the West Kentucky Star is not just a mechanism for providing information to people, it's also a critical way for some customers who might contact you through the internet, through written copy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it works out, Bob, in two ways, in that one of the things that ends up happening is that it's a completely new source for customers that are convinced that digital is the best format, and I'm chasing the new thing, because we talked earlier about the new things, and I'm chasing the new thing. And so digital, the Star, is definitely part of that umbrella of new things that people are chasing. So that attracts a certain clientele for us, and then we're able to build trust with them and say, okay, you trust us over here with this product. Let us show you some of our other family members here and introduce you to our radio product. And this is how we did this, and this is how we do that. And so that helps us in that way. But the other thing that I think that the Star helps us doing with the listeners is we can only be branded in a person's mind as, you can't be branded in multiple ways. A brand stands for something, and we tend to lock in whatever that brand is. So if they listen to WKYQ, they think the first thing they think of is country music. if they listen to Electric 96.9, the first thing they think of is today's hottest music. Those are the elements they think of. They don't think of WKYQ and think of news. So West Kentucky Star gives us that brand that kind of sits above all of our radio stations as this is our news brand. And as a result, then our listeners then go, oh, yeah, there's West Kentucky Star. I'm going to inform them about this news thing. I'm going to inform them about this accident or about this fire or about that. And so that actually it ends up giving us better content again for the radio, because the listener sees that brand, West Kentucky Star, as a news source, whereas they're not necessarily going to see it that way on WKYQ.
Okay, so if you would please just run through all the different stations that's part of Bristol and Paducah, because it's numerous. There's several different outlets there.
Yes. So this is like a test, right, Kevin? You're trying to. Well,
okay.
I get my monthly bonus or not? Right, here it comes.
I know about KYQ. I know about KYX. I know about DDJ, and after that, I kind of get lost.
Sure, me too. So 93.3 WKYQ is our country station. Electric 96.9 WDDJ is our top 40 station. 94.7 The Mix is our adult contemporary station. Willie 102.1 is our classic country station. News Talk 94.3 and News Talk 95.5 is our news and talk stations with conservative talk radio. 99.5 The Fan.
Let's time out for a second. We had another little digital blip there.
Okay.
That last station that you mentioned, that 90 whatever. That last one, if we could pick up right there.
95.5 or 99.5? Did you get the sport right before the sports talk or?
Right before the sports talk.
Okay. I'll just start like this.
Okay. Whatever you want to, yeah.
Okay. Then our fifth station would be News Talk 94.3, and it has a sister station, News Talk 95.5. So that is our news premium product, and then it is our conservative talk radio. And then 99.5 The Fan, our sports talk station. 102.5 DXR, classic hit station, kind of a rock and roll hit station, but not just album rock, okay? And let's see. That's all of them. So
that's a lot, and that covers a lot of different kind of music. It covers a lot of ground. And so, are you able to, through audience measurement, know who's listening to this station versus that station? And do you still do it the way we did in the old days? Do we carve them up by age and gender? Is it still like women age 18 to 30, or how do you carve that up? Or is it more like, okay, here is an ideology, here is a attitude, interest, and opinions. Here's what this person likes.
It's a mixture. That it's not always by age, but generally by age, Kevin. Like, for example, WKYQ is today's new country. And so it's going to be, it's a 25 to 54 demo that they're targeting for, leaning towards women. Mm-hmm. And then Electric 96.9 is a 18 to 49 demo, leaning towards women. And then Willie 102.1 is a 35 to 64 demo. It's country music too, but it's skewing just a little bit older on the scale. Now, Willie's a great radio station for me to make the comment. I've got people 18, 20, 22 that tell me they love listening to Willie, So that's not to say that we don't have anybody below 35 listening to Willie,
right?
But that's not how we program the station, and that's not the audience we do best.
So Nielsen, are the Nielsen ratings you get, is that where you get this information that you can go and then take it to an advertiser and say, hey, if you advertise on this station, here are the people that we can expose to your message?
Yeah, we subscribe to Eastland, and that's a little bit different company. Nielsen in our market does not do the personal people meters, which is highly accurate, and they do that in all of the larger markets, but they don't do that in a smaller market. So in a market our size, Nielsen is still doing their radio measurement through diary, and actually their television measurement is through diary. And I actually find that to be the least accurate of all the measurements that they're doing. So Eastland does theirs by telephone. So what they would do is call you, and they're just asking about your radio listening habits in the last 24 hours.
When they call, do they call just landlines, or do they call cell phones too?
No, great question. We get asked that a lot. What they have is a data bank of all the phone numbers in our area, and they just call numbers at random. So they call cells, they call landlines, they call everything. So to gather that information, and then they're trying to collect information from the listeners that are going to reflect the population makeup. So in other words, if 51% of our population is female and they've already met their quota there, then once they hit that quota, then when somebody says I'm a woman, then they go, okay, well, we need to thank you. We need to move on to another person, because they're trying to hit that number.
Let me follow up with one more question, and then I'm sure that Professor Valentine has some questions too. But just as a curiosity, you mentioned the conservative talk radio, and so in my experience, that is very much how Bristol and Paducah is regarded. Is here's a very conservative talk radio, very Republican, Rush, Hannity, all of these things. And so when your sales staff is out in the community and they're trying to make a sale, how does that play? Do you feel as if, okay, there may be some people that message does not resonate with, that maybe don't want to advertise in your station because that represents an ideology that they are not in agreement with? Is that a factor?
Sure, that's a factor. There's no doubt that there are businesses that would not want to advertise with our station, with the news talk station, because of its ideology. But that hasn't been an issue for us. I mean, we've not had clients that have said, well, I've got a lot of money to spend and I'd like to spend it with you guys, but I don't like your ideology. That's just not happened. What ends up happening instead is, I think, naturally people that are strongly opposed to the ideals that are put forth by the conservative radio, they don't advertise on it. They don't call us. They probably just don't talk to us when we call on them.
Right.
They're just not interested. But the ones that are very passionate about it. And I think a lot of people, while I admit that I am a Republican myself, registered Republican, I think that, a lot of people want to say, well, you guys are this, you're putting forth this. It's all about what's going to make the most money for the company. That's what the company's interested in. And when we first started our talk format, we had balance of conservative and liberal programming. And what happened was, every single time we asked listeners what they wanted to hear more of, They wanted to hear more conservative programming. And from our advertisers, they wanted more conservative programming. And so it eventually just went to where all of our programming became conservative by demand of our listeners and our advertisers, not because it was our ideology.
I think it is fair to say that it is the predominant ideology within your listening area. So I wouldn't think that it would.
Yes, and I think it's important for people to understand Trump, whether you like him wherever you are. That I'm not personally a Trump fan, but no matter where you are, Trump has a favorable rating of around 70% in the state of Kentucky. So that's why that format does well, is because that is the mainstream ideology of Kentucky.
Yeah.
Well, let me raise another issue, Jamie, and let's talk business here. Suppose I am a potential advertiser. I do not advertise on radio at all at this point. I advertise in my local newspaper. Sometimes if I have a big seasonal sale of some kind, I'll try to get coverage on a cable station or maybe WPSD Paducah, but I don't use radio very much. Let's say I am a furniture store, or if it's easier for you, a used car dealer, or just car dealer of any kind. Pick one. What argument would your sales representatives make to me to persuade me that radio is a viable advertising medium?
Well, the big advantage that radio has over any of our competitors is the fact that, let's go back to all the students in your class at one time or another have had to prepare for a test. And if they had to prepare for a test and they had to learn something, then the way that they did that, the process that they did that, was through repetition. Repetition is the mother of all learning.
If they're smart. Yes.
Yes. Some of them might have cheated, but that's not learning. And so repetition is the mother of all learning. And so the reality is, if you think about it from that standpoint, once you read a newspaper ad and you're not interested in it, I'll challenge that no one rereads the newspaper ad again. You don't go, well, by golly, I wasn't interested in anything that ad had to say, but I think I'll reread it and see if I can memorize this message. I mean, you don't do that. And so if you understand that repetition now is key, and you understand that that's what you've got to do, then you could use the television for that. But the only thing is television is pretty expensive for most businesses. They can't afford $500 a piece commercials and the repetition that it takes. And so the advantage that radio has is that we're able to play a message so consistently and so often that a listener ends up memorizing something that they never, ever intended to memorize. And that is our advantage that we have over all of our competition, including social media. Because one of the things that I think that we have an advantage in is that today you may spend a lot of time with Facebook, or you may spend a lot of time with Instagram, or you may have spent a lot of time with YouTube today. But if you're not doing that on a consistent, ongoing basis, because here's what you need two things. You need repetition plus space. In other words, you cramming and getting the repetition 5 times in a 1-hour period, all that does is that may help you pass the test because it's coming up in an hour, but in a week, you won't remember any of that information. So if we're wanting you to recall that information a week from now, 2 weeks from now, what we got to do is repeat it, wait, repeat it, wait, repeat it, wait. And as we continue to do that, what ends up happening is you get something stuck in your head that 3 weeks from now, 3 months from now, boom, it pops out, and you never, ever intended to memorize that. I'm sure that Kevin, if I started saying anything about Macarena, he immediately, a song starts popping in. He can actually even see people doing, because he remembers the Macarena. Now, I'll guarantee you, Kevin didn't sit down and go, I think yeah, there you go. See? And so I guarantee Kevin did not say, I really like that song. I think I'd like to memorize it. In fact, probably a good chance is he didn't like the song and it annoyed him. So the question is, how do you get somebody to memorize something that they find annoying? You do it through repetition. And that's the advantage that we have over everybody else, because they may be spending some time, but if they're not spending that time on a consistent basis, and what tends to happen is we tend to have a number one radio station, our favorite radio station, and we come to that favorite radio station over and over and over and over again, and that allows us to be able to give that repetition that our client needs in order for them to be able to memorize information they never intended to.
I give you that strength, Jamie. Let me ask you this. Let me ask you about the weakness before we go any further.
Okay.
There are some advertisers who look at radio and say, well, yeah, consistent repetition is a strength and it's affordable when you compare it to other broadcast media. However, there are no pictures. What can you say about the lack of a visual element for radio?
Oh, thank you. Gosh, I guess I never thought about that. I guess we should just go home. Here's the great, that's one of the best advantages that radio has. Whenever I say to someone, the announcer comes on in one of those deep voices and says, imagine the most beautiful kitchen you've ever seen. Now, here's the reality. Kevin's most beautiful kitchen that he's ever seen does not look like the most beautiful kitchen that Bob has ever seen. And more important, it's not the most beautiful kitchen that Vicki has ever seen. And that's what's really important about it, because the kitchen that Bob has seen doesn't really matter. He's never going to live in that thing anyway. So that's the reality of what we get to take advantage of, whereas television is stuck with the pictures that they want to show you, and video is stuck with the pictures that they are hoping you like. We get to use the pictures that have already been approved by you and filed away in your head, and we pull those back out and we utilize those. The reality is the listener can't go somewhere they haven't already been before, and so what we just have to do is tap into those resources that are in the mind.
I think some things, as far as the radio commercials that really tune in and work for me, is when I hear the weather forecast, I'm going to tune in. I don't mean just tune the station. I mean, I'm going to listen because I want to know what the weather forecast is. And so when you have a sponsor saying, here's the weather brought to you by, and so forth, that is a tune in. Sometimes there are tune outs. And so if you hit a radio, there might be 2 or 3 stations that are your favorites. And in this market, there could be 7 stations that are Bristol stations that are your favorites, but the commercials come on and you hit next and to go to the next one. But some things you can tune in. Sports scores, forecast.
Most people have more than one station that they like. This is their favorite station. This is their second favorite. When this station's doing something that they don't particularly like, they go to this station. But I'll comment a couple of things on that, Kevin, and that is that, first of all, that we're listening even when we're not aware that we're listening. Because one of the advantages, and that's one of the advantages we have, you've been in the car with somebody and you're talking to your friend in the car and you guys are having a conversation, the radio's on in the background, and all of a sudden a song comes on or a commercial comes on and you go, oh, hey, wait, this is that commercial I was telling you about, and you turn it up. How did that happen? Because you weren't listening, but you were listening.
Yes.
And so that's an advantage. The second example of that is that, you know, when a teacher asks you, for example, you're in the classroom and you're either talking or you're doing something on your device, and the teacher says, John, are you listening? Yes, I'm listening. Well, what did I just say? What can you do? You're able to repeat what the teacher just said, even though you weren't listening. You weren't listening.
But when people intentionally listen, when they say, hey, here's the weather forecast, and then, you know, you get the sponsorship, do you put different price tags on those commercials?
Absolutely. There's higher value on the commercials that our announcers are talking about, are referencing back to. There's higher value on those. So yes, we do put a premium on those. But I think that it's important to note that people, even though they're not paying attention, we're still getting a repetition in there. And that's how, back to my example of the Macarena, that's how you end up memorizing the Macarena, because it wasn't because you sat there and go, oh, hey, Bob, shut up for a minute. This is the Macarena song, and it really annoys me, but I'm trying to memorize it. You know, you don't do that. Right. What happens is it's in the background. You're not hearing it. It's in the background of a restaurant. You're not really hearing it, but yet your brain is paying attention and your brain is storing it. And one of the things that repetition is able to do is continued repetition of anything tells the brain that this must be important because you keep having it pay attention to it. So the brain then takes that information and says, well, I don't know why we're listening to this song, but apparently he really likes it. So let's store it away because he really likes this song. And so that's how your brain keeps up, because it's just programmed with whatever you program it with.
Yeah.
Jamie, this has been really interesting, and we don't want to presume too much on your time, because when you run as many different media outlets as you do, including an online newspaper, you've got to have pretty full days, and we really appreciate it. But before we get to the end, and Kevin may have another question for you, the one I think we really want to consider is, in the eyes of somebody who's been in this industry for 3 decades, and has seen it go from a time when it was sort of the traditional radio medium, almost back to the, well, you don't go back that far, but when the Jack Benny program was the #1 rated show on radio, and 80% of all American radios were tuned to that show when he came on a Saturday night. Times have changed, and they're going to continue to change. Where does Jamie Futrell see the future of radio heading based on the plateau where you're standing right now?
Yeah, according to research, radio, as far as the time spent, has been on a decline, but oddly enough, 2020 is supposed to be the bottom for us, and we're actually it's predicted now that we're going to start picking back up. We start heading back up the curve. So the future in the regards of listenership looks really good for radio. And I think that what we're going to see over the next decade is an explosion of all audio listening. The reality is there can't be any more increase on video, because there is so much video already out there and so many people are consuming video already. So video is its max. So what I think you're going to see over the next decade is an explosion of audio, because people are realizing that audio is a platform that they can consume while doing something else. And so that's very appealing. And so I think audio in all formats will increase over the next decade. And that, of course, that time, as Kevin pointed out earlier, has to come from somewhere. And I think it'll come from video is where I think that time will end up coming from. But the challenge for, and by the way, on time spent with radio versus time spent with, like, for example, social networks, radio outpaces social networks 2-to-1. So there's twice as much time spent with radio as being spent with social networks. But the big challenge for radio is going to be the fact that our bread and butter, our revenue comes from small businesses, and small businesses are diminishing. So radio is not struggling because radio's not good. In fact, I can tell you that we're getting better results for our customers than I've seen us be able to achieve in a decade. So it's not that we can't do it, it's that there are fewer businesses out there for us to generate revenue for. And that's going to be the challenge for radio in the future, because as the larger and larger corporations, the Lowe's and the Home Depots and all of those, take the national platform, they tend to want to utilize network television or even network radio, and that is not good for us because the local radio stations need local ad dollars. So, the good and the bad is the good is we're going to continue to be an impact in the future. The struggle for us is going to be finding the resources economically for us to be able to continue doing great quality product that we're doing.
Jamie, it's my hope that radio will flourish in the future and do more. Something that really scared the heck out of me a few years ago was when the country of Norway completely did away with terrestrial broadcasting altogether. Mm-hmm. So that's a frightening thing, because and of course I have a maybe a different perspective about broadcasting. The songs are space fillers. Where we really need it is to serve the public and being able to say, here's what's going on. Because if something happens, natural disaster, whatever happens, if you can get to a radio and turn it on, and if there's an actual human being at that radio station, it's not automated, then perhaps there's someone there who can tell you what's going on, what roads are open, what roads are closed, where you can get medical help, where you can get food, where you can get shelter. And so that ability, radio has that ability beyond anything else. And so there's a strong need that we make sure that radio survives into the future, because if everything goes, if the infrastructure goes down, the internet's not going to do you much good.
You're exactly right. We have somebody here 24 hours a day, and that's critical to that process. And to your point about natural disaster, we have a plan on how to broadcast in the event of a major earthquake in our region. We have a plan. What would we do? Because we know that in the event of a major earthquake, all the towers are more than likely going to be taken down. So your cell phone's not going to work. So how are we going to communicate with people? And so we have a plan on how to get a tower up, how for us to be able to continue broadcasting. And so those things are of critical importance because we see that as our role. And to the extent of what you talked about, Kevin, of being able to be a good community resource. During the COVID crisis, I received some unwanted attention from our listeners on our News Talk format because we discontinued broadcasting Glenn Beck because I felt like that the comments that Glenn was making was not in the interest of the public. And so those things, that is still seen as our critical role for us, is making sure that we serve the public. But something that that I would remind the students, because most of them probably aren't going to be aware of this, but radio's death, like Mark Twain, has been greatly exaggerated many times. We were told that when these things, they were a block about this size, and they were called 8-tracks, and they were going to put them in the cars, and this was going to be the end of radio. No one would listen to radio anymore because they would listen to their 8-tracks, and we survived. And then it was cassettes. Oh, now we're going to have cassettes in the car, and we survived. And then it was CDs, and we survived. And then it was, oh, now there's satellite radio, and we're still here. And so what has happened is each time radio has adapted and gotten better. And I think that's in part because there's so many individual players. They find a way, and then once they find a way, that kind of spreads like wildfire. This is how they're doing it. When we first started carrying Rush Limbaugh, we were a Christian music radio station for 3/4 of the day, and we carried Rush Limbaugh during the middle of the day because we had heard that Rush Limbaugh was from Cape, and he was, well, then that kind of caught fire, and we were the very first station in our company to go to talk radio format. And so that's what happens with radio. It's a bunch of independent thinkers, and then they end up spreading that because somebody else sees the success.
What a great adaptation, because AM radio is not exactly your best choice if you want to listen to music. FM does it much better. So who was listening to AM? And for years it simply piggybacked whatever the FM station had. It had greater reach, and then suddenly talk radio comes about, and AM radio just boom takes off.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Rush Limbaugh can be credited, whether you like him or love him, whatever. Rush Limbaugh can be credited with saving AM radio.
Well, Jamie, if we remember anything from what you've told us, it may very well be that what really makes the difference in AM radio is that it is local. It serves a local audience. It has the potential to be very helpful to a local audience and to develop a very loyal local audience. That may be something that the big box sellers want to pay attention to. They need to get the message out on a Saturday morning when somebody's working out in the garage. It might be helpful to have that ad for Lowe's or Home Depot remind people where you can get a good price on plywood, because if they don't, then the local lumberyard sure can, and that's what makes it local.
That's right.
We appreciate the insights, Jamie. This has been a really big help.
Thank you all, and just remind your students that we do have a sales internship available. If any of them would be interested, just feel free to contact me. We also have a news internship. I don't know if there are any students in that genre, but we love Murray State students, and thank you again for the opportunity to share with you guys.
Hey, thanks for sharing, Jamie. I learned a lot from you today. I appreciate it.